We have been addressing the subject of divine love mostly from Chakra 7, from the ultimate perspective of non-duality, because that's the absolute truth. And yet, it's very difficult for one still enmeshed in Maya to be able to hold on to these very subtle and slippery ideas, isn't it? They slip away as quickly as the silence slips away back into the noise. And very few ever escape the noise and ever realize their true nature as Brahman. It's a miracle that Ramana did it at age 16 in one day and was in bliss forever after. Without even having read any Advaita. But it is in the power of all of us to do it if we claim the very truth that he proclaims, that all the great sages of India proclaim, great sages of the Advaita lineage, from Gaudapada and Shankara, and many others up until Ramana, and still even today. It is the only truly consistent philosophy ever known in the world. If one ever studies philosophy, one will very easily recognize that all the others, no matter what they are, whether it's materialism or idealism or Marxism or any other, is riddled with inconsistencies. And that's why an Advaita sage can out-argue any philosopher of any other school of thought. But Advaitins aren't interested in arguing. So it rarely happens. And most philosophers aren't interested in the idea of non-duality today. But they used to all be interested in it. Philosophy has degraded along with everything else in the world. But I'd like to bring up one modern philosopher who is also incorrect in his total philosophy, but still a light to the world, a glimmering and blinking light, a dim one at that, but a light. And I give him credit for that. And he's a French philosopher, of course, whose heyday was in the 40s and 50s, during the darkest period of France's history, after it was conquered by Germany, and occupied, and the French were humiliated and in despair and split between those who collaborated with the Nazis and those who were in the resistance, and everyone was afraid of everyone else, being ratted on and being targeted if you did collaborate, being targeted by the resistance, etc. Well, this philosopher, his name is Jean-Paul Sartre. You've probably all heard of him. The great existentialist philosopher. He actually had the guts to stand up and speak out, even in the midst of those times, and became a rallying point for the French nation. He wrote many plays, even while the Nazis were occupying Paris. They went to the line, they didn't quite cross the line, so they hauled him away, but he went as close as possible. In the same way that today someone like Noam Chomsky, I'm sure the establishment would love to haul him away and silence him. But he's too famous, too well known, and they can point to him as the proof. See, we allow free speech here. So he's a good icon of the illusion of freedom and democracy. But in any case, why I bring up Sartre is that his existentialist philosophy has some elements that are very congruent with Sat Yoga and important for us to study. I think we'll actually read at least one of his texts in one of our book groups. Oh, by the way, I would say also that I applaud him because he truly lived up to his own philosophy in his life. Even after the war, when the French recovered and returned to being a colonialist power and occupied Vietnam and Algeria and many other parts of Africa, he stood up against it. He denounced France for that. And especially during the Algerian War, when he demanded that the French leave, that what they were doing totally violated the French principles and the ideals of liberté, fraternité, égalité. They were oppressing, enslaving, torturing the Algerians and the Vietnamese. And so the establishment finally decided we've had enough of Sartre. And they blackballed him, and they hired a bunch of pseudo-philosophers to denounce his writings, and he wasn't allowed on the TV or radio, and they marginalized him to the best they could. But he had an international following by then, and he never stopped. And later, after the French lost in Vietnam, and at the famous Battle of Dien Bien Phu, their army was destroyed. They had to leave. Of course, the U.S. took over and pursued an even more cruel, devastating war on all of Indochina, which provoked the Khmer Rouge and the horrors of those killing fields in Cambodia, destroyed Laos, destroyed some of the most beautiful and pristine and still pure societies in the world. And Sartre had the courage to denounce the U.S. against tremendous international pressure. But he was no saint, and in his own life, he was a tormented soul. He had a longtime girlfriend, Simone de Beauvoir, who was no slouch as a philosopher herself. But he would never live with her, never marry her, which saddened her greatly. And he was a womanizer and was constantly having affairs, until finally she started having affairs, and then he was in agony over it. And they tried to settle things. But I think because of this tumult in his life and this constant infatuation and chakra 2 falls, he didn't ever complete his philosophical work, and his philosophy ended up with many inconsistencies and failures to grapple with some of the deepest issues. Nonetheless, having said that, his philosophy began with the idea that existence precedes essence. Whereas in the Christian tradition, essence came first. Your divine soul came first. You incarnated as a soul in a body, and you were able to know yourself and have a life that was in accord with the divine will, and you knew what life was about. Well, of course, after the Catholic Church fell apart in the so-called Enlightenment and the modern age, that no longer worked for anyone. And so Sartre did his best to recover that which was most noble in the human spirit without returning to religious discourse. And so his idea was, which is, I think, an accurate description of modern life, that man is born into existence without an essence. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what this is all about. He doesn't know where he came from or where he's going or what he wants. He's totally lost in this world. And that's accurate. Of course, not that we don't have essence, but we are cut off from it. We don't know it. We've lost touch with Brahman. And so in this world, these humans, lost souls, flail around seeking their essence. And they end up having to make it, to discover it, to create it, to decide what is my life about, what is my purpose, my meaning, what do I stand for, what should be my principles, and figure it all out for themselves. Which I think is a pretty good description of the modern age. Most people never grow to the point where they actually decide what principles to live by. Most people never reach an ethical level of life where such considerations of what should I do even actually occur to them. They are mass men, we call them today. Conformists who go along, or nonconformists who rebel without a cause, right? But he called for human beings to reach that level, to be able to make true, authentic choices in their lives. And he said there's no excuse for not doing so. His famous line is, man is free, and our freedom is absolute, and nothing and no one can take it away. And if you don't feel free, it's because you're deceiving yourself, and you've taken away your own freedom. And he's absolutely right. Even someone in prison is free because they have a free response to that situation. Remember Omar Mukhtar on the gallows being hanged. He died a free man. He assumed fully his life and his death. He took responsibility, and there was no fear of death. There was absolute nobility, which continues to inspire those in Libya. And they have not been conquered by NATO, by the way. That war continues, and it will continue. In any case, this understanding of our absolute radical freedom is essential if you're going to conduct a truly meaningful life. And his famous phrase, there are no excuses, still stands. There are no excuses. And so Sartre made, I think, the most powerful and important critique of Freudianism and the whole psychoanalytic establishment of anyone. He said Freud was a fundamentalist who took his own metaphors as if they were real, when they are self-created illusions. The ego structure is made up by yourself. You create your own unconscious. You create the censor, so you can pretend you're under the control of some force beyond your ability to eliminate. You can say, the devil made me do it. It gives you plausible deniability and license to live an unethical life, a life without principles, a life that violates the freedom of others. And to do that, you pay the price of having taken away your own freedom. And I think his analysis was accurate, very beautiful. His magnum opus, or one of them, Being and Nothingness, explains this in great detail. And he refashioned psychoanalysis according to his understanding and called it existential psychoanalysis. And in my view, it's the most accurate paradigm of psychoanalysis, because he refuses to believe in the unconscious. It is a self-created fantasy that we use in order not to know about our fantasies and our secret desires and all of that, so that we can pretend we're controlled by them. And what he said, this is mauvaise foi, bad faith. If you do this, if you create an unconscious, if you create a censor, if you create superego attacks, you are living an inauthentic existence. You have absolute control of your own mind. Absolute freedom. No one can take that away from you. Not the most horrendous brainwashing can take that away unless you agree to it, unless you willingly give up your freedom. And to me, this is a very important basic principle to recognize. Don't scapegoat anyone else. Don't blame the environment. Don't blame your mother. Don't blame your father. Don't blame Obama or George Bush. Don't blame anyone for your feeling of lack of freedom. No one did it to you. You chose it freely. That was your response to an oppressive environment, no doubt, but nonetheless not one that you could not have resisted, as he encouraged the resistance in France against collaboration with the enemy and not becoming a Nazi or a Vichy traitor. And he stood up for that in a time of great danger to himself. And so there is authenticity to his life in that regard. And so for a Sat Yogi who knows far more than Sartre knew about the true reality, he never found his essence. He lived purely on that level of existence. He called the human the en soi pour soi, the in itself for itself. It's in itself, which is as close to being as he got, but it's really more of a vegetative existence. It's not the essential being. And it's for itself. But every living creature is an in itself for itself, really, isn't it? So there's nothing distinctly human about that. And he failed, I think, to recognize the human essence, and that human beings are the only creatures who do think about their existence and the meaning of it, and who are they really, and what is their essence. And they think about it because somewhere inside they know it. We all know it. And if we pretend we do not know it, we are in bad faith. So he didn't carry his critique far enough. He himself was in bad faith because he refused to go deep enough within to discover the essence, and made the superficial assumption that there was none. But that's Kali Yuga. Well, we can be thankful he went as far as he did toward the truth. And a Sat Yogi can do no less. We cannot make excuses for ourselves or pretend we're weak or we're under the domination of some psychic force, whether it's a complex fantasy, an obsession, or a demonic entity, or whatever. All of them are unreal. All of them are fantasies. All that is real is Shiva. You know that. Everything else is Maya. But the human being lives in bad faith in order not to love, in order to have an excuse not to be loving to their fellow being. Not to love nature, not to love God or even believe in God, and not to love oneself truly, and not to love one another. That's the ego's function. To have a plausible excuse not to love. To be able to justify it to oneself, and self-righteously then be aggressive toward others. Isn't that true? So Sat Yogis must come out of denial that the ego is any barrier, that the mind is any obstacle to living in absolute freedom. And that we do everything that the ego does, which is including projecting its deceptions into the body and creating diseases and illnesses of all kinds in order to evade responsibility. And every other of its tricks, they are all done secretly by oneself. You are the sensor. Don't think the sensor is some autonomous entity controlling you. You created it in order to have some separation. If you feel there are a lot of fragments operating, you fragmented your psyche so that you could be possessed by these fragments and say, I have no choice. And that's the only reason to live in bad faith. And there's no justification to live in bad faith. And once you accept that as a principle of life, your sadhana will accelerate. You will reach God consciousness very easily and very quickly. Because whatever the ego's resistance is, you know in advance that it's a way of being inauthentic. It's a way of lying to yourself. And that when you live in truth, in satya, you are free from all of those obstacles. And it is when we are free from all of those obstacles that the divine love flows. From our essence, from that lost essence that Sartre never found. That's what that essence is divine love. And without that, you don't have a true existence. It's only Maya. It's only illusion. And it's not an authentic life in which you are an avatar, a manifestation of the real supreme self that in fact, in truth, you are. But to allow yourself to realize it, there must be a free agreement within, a recognition of your responsibility to love, to be loved, and to allow the divine love, the highest love, the purest love, not a manipulative human love, divine love, healing love, the love that everyone is seeking, the love that brings people to Arunachala. People go thousands of miles to see Ammaji in India because she'll give them a hug for 5 seconds of a line of 10,000 people standing. Oh, you get your hug, next hug. Okay, because that's as close as they have ever come to experiencing love. They probably even imagine it's divine love. How can she love 10,000 people a day and billions of people, right? But okay, I believe it's sincere and real. She's not in bad faith. But what is that going to give you? But people live on that. They'll remember it. They'll talk about their 10-second hug from Ammaji for years, and they'll become her disciples on the basis of that. Now I believe in love. She proved it. She hugged me. Okay. Great. Why not all of us live in love? You don't need a hug to prove love is real. You prove love is real. Ramana proved love is real. Many saints and sages have proven that. You don't need more proof. You need the courage to live as love. And all of you here have the courage. But the only necessity left is to stop making that last excuse. My ego made me do it. And then you'll reach Sat Chitananda very easily. And fulfill your real destiny and mission with the most noble possible life that anyone could lead. That's all I have to say. Namaste.